He walked into the desert to die, then heard a baby crying in the sand. A broken soldier carrying nothing but guilt and a gun was ready to end it all under the blazing sun. But that cry stopped him cold. Out there in the dust lay a newborn, left to perish. He picked her up, thinking it was salvation, but it was only the beginning. Townsfolk whispered, the marshal slammed the jail keys, and the railroad's richest man claimed the child as his own blood. What starts as a mercy becomes a fight for justice, a battle of law, faith, and one man's soul. Dust on the street, the church bell tolls, the courtroom holds its breath. Can a man who went into the desert to die protect the life he was never meant to find? Or will power and prejudice rip the baby from his arms forever? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. Kevin Boone stumbled across the desert sand as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. His weathered boots scraped against loose rocks, and the canteen at his hip swung with each unsteady step. The weight of his revolver pulled at his gun belt, a constant reminder of his purpose out here in this desolate place. The morning air still held a bite of night's chill, but Kevin knew it wouldn't last. Soon enough, the sun would climb higher, turning the desert into an unforgiving furnace. That was what he was counting on. After all the death he'd seen, all the men lost under his command, it seemed fitting to let the desert claim him too. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper, "I reckon it's time for release." The words scattered on the wind, lost among the endless dunes and scraggly brush. As the sun climbed higher, Kevin's steps grew more labored. The canteen, still mostly full, bounced against his leg. He hadn't touched it since yesterday, and his cracked lips stung with every breath. Sweat trickled down his neck, soaking the collar of his faded blue shirt. Hours passed like molasses in winter. The desert shimmer played tricks on his eyes, pools of water that vanished when he blinked, ghost trees that danced on the horizon. His head spun with each step, thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Faces of dead soldiers floated before him. Young boys who'd trusted his leadership followed his orders right into Confederate cannon fire. When his knees finally buckled, Kevin welcomed it. He sank into the burning sand, not bothering to break his fall. The rough grains pressed against his cheek as he lay there, waiting for the peace he'd been seeking. His fingers twitched near the holster, but he'd decided against that route. Better to let nature take its course. That's when he heard it, so faint he thought it was another trick of his addled mind. A cry, high and thin, cutting through the desert silence. Kevin lifted his head, sand falling from his graying hair. He listened hard, wondering if the sun had finally cooked his brain proper. But there it came again, unmistakably human, unmistakably young. "Sweet Jesus," he muttered, pushing himself to his hands and knees. The world tilted dangerously, but he forced himself to crawl toward the sound. It seemed to come from behind a low rise of sand, just a few yards away. The crying grew louder as he approached, taking on a desperate edge that tugged at something deep in his chest. When he crested the small dune, he froze, certain now that he was seeing things. There, partially buried in wind-blown sand, lay a bundle wrapped in a Navajo blanket. The intricate patterns of red and black were faded by sun and wear, but still beautiful. As Kevin watched, the bundle squirmed, and another cry emerged. His trembling hands reached out, carefully brushing away the sand. The blanket came free easily, revealing a tiny face scrunched up in distress. A baby girl, no more than a few months old, her brown skin hot to the touch but still alive. Kevin gathered her up, cradling her against his chest. Her small heart fluttered like a bird's wing against his rough palm. "How in heaven's name did you get out here, little one?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't answer. The baby's cries softened at his touch, turning to whimpers. Her eyes, when they opened, were dark and intelligent, fixing on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. Kevin looked around, searching for any sign of where she'd come from or who might have left her. But the desert stretched empty in all directions, holding its secrets close. His gaze fell to the horizon behind him, where he knew an old mission settlement lay about 2 days' walk back, the last sign of civilization he'd passed on his way out here. The sun beat down mercilessly as he knelt there, holding this miracle of life in his death-seeking hands. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd come out here to die, and instead he'd found someone to live for. But the choice still lay before him like a fork in a trail. He could leave her. Surely someone else would come along, someone better suited to care for a child, someone whose soul wasn't weighted down with the ghosts of war. The thought had barely formed before shame washed through him. What kind of man would he be to abandon an innocent to the same fate he'd chosen for himself? The desert wind whipped across his face, stinging his eyes and carrying the baby's renewed whimpers. Kevin felt the last of his resistance crumble away. "All right, little one," he said softly. "Reckon we're in this together now." With careful movements, he unwound his belt and fashioned a sling across his chest using the Navajo blanket. The baby settled against him, her small body a spot of warmth over his heart. He took a small sip from his canteen, just enough to wet his throat, then let a few drops fall on her parched lips. Standing made his head swim, but Kevin forced his legs to steady. The mission lay somewhere beyond the western horizon, a good 2 days' walk if he pushed hard. He didn't know if they had enough water to make it, or if his strength would hold. But for the first time in years, he had something to fight for besides memories and regret. "Lord," he whispered, adjusting the precious bundle against his chest, "if you're still listening to an old soldier like me, we could use a bit of help." The baby made a soft cooing sound, almost like an answer to his prayer. Kevin took his first step back toward life, then another. The sun climbed higher, fierce and unrelenting, but he kept moving. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and heat, his boots leaving long furrows in the sand. The baby dozed fitfully against him, occasionally whimpering when the jostling disturbed her sleep. As morning stretched toward noon, Kevin fell into a rhythm of counting steps between sips of water. He saved most for the baby, letting just enough pass his own lips to keep moving. His shadow shortened beneath him, then began to lengthen again as afternoon wore on. Still, he walked. The desert stretched endless around them, broken only by scattered rocks and stubborn patches of scrub brush. Kevin's world narrowed to the sound of his boots in the sand and the precious heartbeat against his chest. His lips moved in constant prayer, not for himself anymore, but for the child who'd been placed in his path. When the sun finally began to sink, painting the sky in fierce oranges and reds, Kevin allowed himself to rest. He found a shallow depression behind a large rock that offered some shelter from the wind. Carefully, he checked on his small companion. The baby's face was flushed with heat, but her breathing was steady. When he touched her cheek, her eyes fluttered open, regarding him with that same solemn gaze. "You're a fighter, ain't you?" he murmured, offering her another few drops of water. "Well, that makes 2 of us." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, Kevin held the child close, sharing what warmth he could. The desert night would be cold, but they'd face it together. Tomorrow would bring another day of harsh sun and harder walking. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kevin Boone looked forward to seeing the dawn. He didn't know what waited for them at the mission, or what the future might hold. But the weight of the baby in his arms anchored him to the present in a way no sermon or bottle ever had. God, it seemed, wasn't finished with him yet. The thought brought a peace he hadn't expected to find out here in the desert. "Sleep now, little one," he whispered, adjusting the blanket around her. "We've got a long walk ahead, but we'll make it. I promise you that." and in his heart, Kevin knew it was a promise he'd die keeping. Not the death he'd come seeking, but one that might finally bring meaning to all those years of carrying guilt and grief. The baby sighed in her sleep, one tiny hand curled against his shirt. Above them, the desert stars wheeled in their ancient paths, bearing witness to the moment a lost soul found its way back to life through the cry of a child in the wilderness. The setting sun painted long shadows across the desert as Kevin stumbled toward the weathered adobe walls of the mission. His legs trembled with each step, and the precious bundle strapped to his chest felt heavier than a cavalry pack. The baby had grown quiet hours ago, letting out only occasional whimpers that tore at his heart. Through blurred vision, he saw figures moving near the mission entrance, black habits fluttering in the evening breeze. The sisters must have spotted him, because suddenly there was movement and urgent voices calling out. "Mother Mary, preserve us!" Sister Agnes's weathered face appeared before him, her usually stern expression melting into concern. "Brother, you're half dead! Martha, fetch water, quickly!" Kevin tried to speak, but his parched throat produced only a rasp. His knees buckled, and gentle hands guided him down onto the cool earth. Someone pressed a tin cup of water to his lips. "Small sips," cautioned a younger sister. "Not too fast." The water tasted sweeter than any wine he'd ever known. As strength slowly returned to his limbs, Kevin managed to croak out, "The baby, please." Sister Agnes was already carefully unwrapping the infant from his chest. Her experienced hands moved with gentle efficiency, checking the child's condition. "She's dehydrated, but alive. Sister Martha, bring goat's milk, diluted with water, and some of that fresh bread." Kevin watched through heavy-lidded eyes as the sisters tended to the baby, feeding her tiny amounts of the milk mixture. His head cleared enough to notice their expressions changing as they examined the blanket she'd been wrapped in. "These markings," Sister Martha whispered, fingers tracing the faded patterns. "They're Apache work." Sister Agnes's face grew grave. "A half Apache child, then?" She glanced at Kevin. "Where did you find her?" 2 days out, Kevin managed between bites of the bread they'd given him. "In the desert, alone." He didn't mention his own purpose in walking into that wasteland. Something told him the sisters would understand anyway. "You must have carried her all that way," Sister Martha said softly. "God surely guided your steps." Sister Agnes, however, was shaking her head slowly. "The rail town's not 3 days' ride from here. They don't take kindly to half-breed children." The word seemed to pain her. "There's been trouble. Raids, reprisals. The settlers are afraid, and fear makes men cruel." Kevin pushed himself up straighter, fighting exhaustion. "Then you'll keep her safe here? The mission ... "We barely have enough to feed ourselves," Sister Agnes cut in, though her voice was gentle. "And the townspeople, they watch us. One wrong move, one excuse, and they could turn against the mission entirely. We help who we can, when we can, but—" "Please," Kevin said, his voice breaking. "She has no one else." The sisters exchanged looks that held volumes of unspoken sorrow. Sister Martha clutched her rosary, tears bright in her eyes. "We cannot," Sister Agnes said finally. "God forgive us, but we cannot." The weight of their refusal settled over the courtyard like evening shadows. Kevin watched as they laid the baby in a makeshift crib, really just a wooden box lined with clean cloth. His heart ached at how small she looked there, how alone. They gave him a cot in a side room, close enough to hear the infant's occasional cries through the night. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by memories of war mixed with fresh guilt. Each time the baby whimpered, he found himself automatically reaching out, as if those few days in the desert had forged an unbreakable bond. Dawn crept through the small window, painting the adobe walls gold. Kevin sat up, his body stiff but stronger after rest and food. He found Sister Martha already up, preparing a fresh mixture of goat's milk. She's strong, the young nun said, showing him how to feed the baby drop by drop, like she knows she has to fight. Kevin watched the infant's tiny throat work as she swallowed, her dark eyes fixed on his face with that same solemn look that had first pierced his soul out in the desert. "You've kept me alive, little one," he whispered. "Reckon I owe you the same." He was so focused on the feeding that he didn't hear Sister Agnes approach. Her shadow fell across them, and when he looked up, she was holding something out to him, a small silver crucifix on a leather cord. "The child needs a name," she said quietly. "That choice should be yours now." Kevin accepted the crucifix, feeling its weight in his palm. He looked down at the baby, remembering how her cry had called him back from the brink of despair. The name came to him then, clear as sunrise. "Mercy," he said. "Her name is Mercy." Sister Agnes nodded, as if she'd expected nothing else. "A good name, a strong name." She hesitated, then added, "There's a settlement called Dry Wells, about a day's ride north. You can get supplies there, milk, cloth, what you'll need for her. Your horse has been fed and watered." Kevin blinked in surprise. He'd forgotten about his horse entirely, having left it ground-tied near a waterhole before walking into the desert. The sisters must have found it and brought it in. With help from Sister Martha, he fashioned a better sling for Mercy from clean cloth, keeping the Navajo blanket as well. It was her heritage, after all, whatever troubles that might bring. The baby settled against his chest, as if she belonged there, her weight somehow both burden and blessing. Standing in the mission doorway, Kevin mounted, his horse carefully, making sure Mercy was secure. Sister Agnes pressed a small bundle of bread and dried meat into his saddlebag. "Go with God," she said softly. "Both of you." Kevin touched the brim of his hat in respect, words of gratitude catching in his throat. He turned his horse northward, toward Dry Wells, and whatever future awaited them. The morning sun warmed his back as they rode, and Mercy made small, contented sounds against his chest. He touched the crucifix now hanging around his neck, then gently stroked Mercy's cheek. "Just you and me now, little one," he murmured. "Just you and me." The mission grew smaller behind them as they rode into the morning light. Kevin kept one hand on the reins, the other curved protectively around Mercy. Each hoofbeat carried them further from the place he'd meant to end his life, and closer to something he'd never expected to find: a reason to live. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Kevin guided his horse down the main street of Dry Wells. The town stretched before him, a collection of weathered buildings fighting for survival against the desert's endless appetite. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and Mercy squirmed restlessly against his chest, her small whimpers growing more insistent. "Almost there, little one," he murmured, scanning the storefronts until he spotted Wilkins' General Store. The wooden sign creaked in the hot breeze, letters faded but still readable. Kevin dismounted carefully, keeping one arm wrapped protectively around Mercy while tying his horse to the hitching post. A bell tinkled above the door as he stepped inside. The store's dimness felt like a blessing after the harsh sunlight, and the familiar scents of coffee, leather, and dried goods filled his nostrils. Behind the counter, a plump woman in her 50s looked up from her ledger, her welcoming smile faltering as she took in his dusty appearance and the bundle against his chest. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Kevin said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I need some milk and swaddling cloth for the baby." Mrs. Wilkins, he assumed she was the proprietor's wife, approached cautiously. "Let me see the little one," she said, her motherly instincts clearly warring with uncertainty. As Kevin shifted Mercy to show her, the Navajo blanket came into view. Mrs. Wilkins gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Her eyes darted to the window, then back to Kevin. That's Apache work," she whispered, taking a step back. Kevin's heart sank, but he pressed on. "She needs milk, ma'am. She's just a baby, nothing more." Movement caught his eye, faces appearing at the store windows, drawn by Mrs. Wilkins' reaction. Word was spreading through the town like wildfire, and Kevin could feel the weight of hostile stares growing heavier by the moment. The bell above the door rang again. Kevin turned to see Marshal Tom Braddock filling the doorway, his badge catching the light that filtered through the dusty windows. The lawman's weathered face was set in hard lines, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Heard we had a stranger in town," Braddock said, his voice gravelly with implied threat. "With some interesting company." Kevin shifted slightly, angling himself between the marshal and Mercy. "Just passing through, Marshal. Looking to buy supplies for the baby." "That so?" Braddock's eyes narrowed as he took in the Navajo blanket. "We don't need more Apache trouble here. Lost enough good folks to raids already?" He took a step forward, boots scraping against the wooden floor. "Best take that child elsewhere." "She needs milk," Kevin repeated firmly, though he kept his tone respectful. "Nothing more. We'll be on our way once we have what we need." The tension in the room grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, more townspeople had gathered, their shadows darkening the windows. Mercy began to fuss louder, perhaps sensing the hostility around her. "Marshall's right," someone called from the doorway. "Ain't natural, a white man with an Apache baby." Kevin felt his muscles tense, remembering similar moments of rising violence from his war days. But before things could escalate further, a new voice cut through the growing murmurs. "That's enough, all of you." An older woman pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Wilkins, the rancher's wife, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and her expression brooking no argument. She stood barely shoulder height to Kevin, but her presence filled the room. "A baby's a baby," she declared, fixing the marshal with a stern look. "And I won't have it said that Drywells turned away a hungry child, no matter who their parents might have been." The marshal's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Mrs. Wilkins, you know the trouble we've had." "I know a great many things, Tom Braddock," she interrupted, "including what your own mama would say if she saw you threatening a man for trying to feed a baby." Something flickered in Braddock's eyes. Perhaps memory, perhaps shame. He held Mrs. Wilkins' gaze for a long moment before turning back to Kevin. "You've got until sundown," he growled. "Then I want you and that child out of my town." The marshal stalked out, and gradually the crowd at the windows dispersed, though Kevin could feel their disapproval lingering like storm clouds. Mrs. Wilkins waited until the door closed behind the last onlooker before hurrying behind the counter. "Here," she said quietly, pulling out several cans of condensed milk and some clean cloth. She worked quickly, wrapping the items in brown paper and slipping them into a cloth bag. "You'll want to water it down some. 1 part milk to 2 parts water for one so young. Keep it cool as you can." Kevin reached for his money pouch, but she shook her head. "Just take it and go," she whispered. "Quick now, before they come back." "Ma'am, I can't." "You can and you will." She pressed the bag into his hands, then reached out to touch Mercy's cheek with gentle fingers. "God go with you both." Kevin nodded his thanks, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Outside, he mounted up as quickly as he could while keeping Mercy secure, feeling the weight of hostile stares from every porch and doorway. He urged his horse into a walk, then a trot once they cleared the town limits, not slowing until Drywells was just a smudge on the horizon. A mile out, he found a small hollow sheltered by mesquite trees, as good a camping spot as any. The sun was setting as he dismounted, painting the desert in deep oranges and purples. He spread his bedroll beneath the largest tree and set about gathering wood for a small fire. Once the flames were crackling steadily, Kevin prepared Mercy's milk with shaking hands, carefully measuring the portions as Mrs. Wilkins had instructed. The baby drank eagerly, her tiny fingers curling around his weathered one as she fed. "There now," he murmured, beginning to hum without even realizing it. The tune was broken and uncertain, some half-remembered hymn from his childhood, when his mama would sing during Sunday service. He didn't know all the words anymore, but the melody still brought comfort. Mercy's grip on his finger tightened as she drifted off to sleep, and Kevin felt something shift inside his chest. The marshal's threats still echoed in his ears, and he knew the road ahead would be hard. But looking down at this small life that had quite literally pulled him back from the edge of despair, he felt a flutter of hope he hadn't known in years. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kevin made his decision. He would find work nearby. Ranches always needed hands, and he knew horses better than most. Somehow, some way, he would make a life for them both. "Sleep tight, little Mercy," he whispered, adjusting the blanket around her. "Tomorrow's another day." The night deepened around their small camp, coyotes calling in the distance. Kevin kept watch, one hand resting protectively near the baby, the other close to his gun. The fire crackled softly, throwing dancing shadows against the mesquite trees, while above them, the desert stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to this strange new family forged in the wilderness. Dawn painted the desert in soft rose and gold as Kevin mounted his horse, Mercy securely strapped to his chest. He had wrapped her in a clean cloth from Mrs. Wilkins, keeping the Navajo blanket hidden in his saddlebag. Best not to draw more unwanted attention. The morning air still held its chill as he rode, scanning the horizon for signs of ranches. Mercy stirred against him, making small sounds that he was learning meant hunger. He pulled his horse to a stop beneath a twisted mesquite tree, carefully mixing the condensed milk as Mrs. Wilkins had shown him. "There now, little one," he murmured, cradling her awkwardly as she drank. His hands, more used to reins and rifles, felt clumsy with such a delicate task. "We'll find work today. Have to keep you fed proper." An hour's ride brought him to the first ranch, but the owner turned him away with a cold look at Mercy. The second place wasn't much better. The foreman's eyes had narrowed at the sight of the baby, and his refusal had been quick and sharp. The sun climbed higher as Kevin approached the third property. A weathered sign read Sanchez Ranch in faded letters. The land looked well-tended, if modest. Sheep dotted the hillsides, and the fences, though old, stood straight and true. As he approached, he spotted a woman and a teenage boy moving among the sheep. The woman straightened at the sound of hoofbeats, one hand shading her eyes. Her dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and her practical dress spoke of hard work. "Buenos dias," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "Can I help you?" Kevin reined his horse to a stop, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, name's Kevin Boone. I'm looking for work if you have any to spare." The woman, who he guessed must be the widow Sanchez he'd heard mentioned in town, approached carefully, her son trailing behind. Her eyes went first to Kevin's face, then to Mercy, who had begun to fuss again in the growing heat. "A baby?" Something in her expression softened, though wariness remained in her stance. "Where is the mother?" "Found her in the desert 2 days back," Kevin said simply. "Couldn't leave her to die." Maria Sanchez studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "Come down from there. You look hungry, and that little one needs to be in the shade." Kevin dismounted, following Maria and her son to the ranch house. It was a solid adobe structure, cool inside despite the rising heat. Maria gestured him to a chair at the kitchen table. "Miguel," she said to her son, "bring water for the señor's horse." The boy nodded and slipped out. Maria busied herself at the stove, soon placing cornbread and coffee before Kevin. As he struggled to balance Mercy and eat, she watched with knowing eyes. "You're holding her wrong," she said finally, moving closer. "May I?" Kevin nodded, carefully passing Mercy. To her, Maria demonstrated the proper way to cradle the infant, supporting her head just so. "Like this, see? And after she feeds, you must burp her, gentle pats like this." She demonstrated with practiced ease. "I was midwife to many mothers before my husband died. I know babies." Kevin watched intently, absorbing every detail. "Much obliged, ma'am. Truth is, I don't know the first thing about caring for a little one." "That's plain to see," Maria said, but her tone held no mockery. She handed Mercy back, watching as Kevin mimicked her motions. "Better, you learn quick at least." Miguel returned, and Maria spoke quietly with him in Spanish. The boy nodded and disappeared again into the yard. "We need help mending the north fence line," Maria said. "And the well needs clearing. The water's running slow. 3 days' work at least. The bunkhouse is empty. You and the little one can stay there." Relief flooded through Kevin. "Thank you, ma'am. We won't be any trouble." The days fell into a pattern. Kevin worked from sunrise to sunset, mending fences and hauling water. Maria often appeared with advice about Mercy's care, how to check if milk was too warm, the best way to soothe a colicky cry. In the evenings, Miguel would join Kevin on the bunkhouse porch, sharing tales his grandfather had told him of old Mexico. By Sunday morning, Maria appeared at the bunkhouse door in her best dress. "We're going to church," she announced. "You'll come with us." Kevin hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "The baby needs a blessing," Maria said firmly, "and you need prayer. We all do." The adobe church sat on the edge of town, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the morning sun. Kevin felt eyes on him as he followed Maria and Miguel inside, Mercy bundled against his chest. They found seats near the back, but there was no hiding from the whispers and stares. Reverend Holloway appeared at the pulpit, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Kevin and Mercy. But he made no comment, simply opening his Bible and beginning the service. When the congregation rose to sing Rock of Ages, Kevin remained seated, feeling out of place. But as the familiar melody filled the church, Mercy, who had been squirming, grew still. Her tiny hand clutched at his shirt as the voices rose in harmony. "Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in thee." Kevin's eyes burned suddenly with unexpected tears. How long had it been since he'd allowed himself to pray? Since he'd believed prayer might be answered? Yet here he sat, holding living proof that God still moved in the desert wastes. "Please, Lord," he prayed silently, "give me strength to protect her, to be what she needs." After the service, Kevin could hear the murmurs as people filed past. Some were curious, others suspicious. A few older women crossed themselves. Maria kept close, her presence a quiet buffer between Kevin and the worst of the stares. "Don't mind them," she said softly as they left the church. "People fear what they don't understand, but God's love is bigger than their fear." Kevin nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Mercy had fallen asleep against him, peaceful despite the whispers that followed them down the church steps. In that moment, with the morning sun warm on his face and Maria's steady presence beside him, Kevin felt something he hadn't known in years: hope. The days stretched into a week, each sunrise bringing new tasks at the Sanchez Ranch. Kevin threw himself into the work, grateful for the routine and the chance to earn his keep. His muscles, already hardened from years of riding, grew accustomed to the steady rhythm of ranch life. The morning air rang with the sound of his axe splitting wood. Sweat trickled down his back despite the early hour. From where he worked, he could see Maria hanging laundry while Mercy napped in a basket nearby, shaded by an old blanket strung between posts. "Water break," Maria called out, approaching with a tin cup. She glanced at the growing woodpile. "You work as hard as 3 men." Kevin took the cup with a nod of thanks. "Least I can do. That wagon wheel needs fixing too. Noticed it wobbling yesterday." "You know wagons?" "Yes, ma'am. Learned in the Army. Had to keep supply wagons rolling no matter what." The words slipped out before he could catch them. He rarely mentioned his military service. Maria didn't press, just nodded and checked on Mercy, who stirred and made small, hungry sounds. Kevin moved to get her, but Maria waved him back to work. "I'll feed her. You finish the wood." By evening, Kevin had the wagon up on blocks, the worn wheel removed. He worked by lantern light, carefully fitting new wooden spokes he'd shaped from seasoned oak. Maria appeared with a bowl of beans and tortillas. "You need to eat," she said firmly. "Come inside. I'll show you how to boil cloths for Mercy. They need to be clean, or she'll get sick." In the kitchen, Maria demonstrated how to properly sanitize the cloth diapers, explaining which herbs helped prevent rash. When milk ran low, she taught him to make thin gruel that would keep the baby fed until they could get more supplies. "Like this," she said, stirring the pot. "Not too thick. Babies need it just right, like the Three Bears porridge." Kevin's hands, rough from years of handling reins and rifles, learned to measure tiny portions and test temperatures against his wrist. Mercy thrived under their shared care, her cheeks growing rounder, her grip stronger when she clutched his finger. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in streaks of orange and purple, Maria found Kevin on the porch, Mercy sleeping against his chest. She settled into the other chair, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Marshal Braddock was asking about you in town today," she said quietly. "You should know. He looks for reasons to drive folks out if they don't fit his idea of proper citizens." Kevin's jaw tightened. Figured as much from how he acted at the store. "This town—" Maria sighed. "The prejudice runs deep. They see an Apache blanket, they stop seeing the baby wrapped in it." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. Finally, Kevin spoke, his voice low. "During the war, I commanded a cavalry unit. Had 53 men under me." He paused, the words heavy with memory. "Lost 17 in one day, in a battle that gained us nothing but blood-soaked ground. Their faces. I see them sometimes, especially at night. Young boys, most of them, following my orders into hell." Maria's needles stilled. "The weight of command," she said softly. "My Juan, he led a group of ranchers against raiders who were stealing cattle. 10 men rode out. Only 3 came back." Her voice caught. "That was 6 years ago. The raiders returned 2 months later and killed him while he worked our south field." They sat in shared silence as darkness settled over the land. No words of comfort were offered. None were needed. Their losses spoke their own language. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Kevin helped Miguel load the wagon with wool to sell in town. Maria gave them a list of supplies to buy and a warning look that Kevin understood. Stay alert. Avoid trouble. The town was busy with weekend traffic. Kevin kept Mercy close as they made their way to the wool merchant's shop. His cavalry training showed in how he constantly scanned the street, noting positions, watching movements. The whispers started as soon as they were spotted. Women drew their children closer as they passed. Men stopped their conversations to stare. Kevin felt the familiar weight of his revolver at his hip, but kept his hands clearly visible, holding Mercy. Miguel handled the wool sale while Kevin waited outside with the wagon. A group of men gathered near the saloon, their muttered comments carrying on the breeze. "Apache sympathizer. Probably a rustler. Ain't natural, man, raising a half-breed baby." One of them spat, the tobacco juice landing near Kevin's boots. His hand twitched, old instincts rising, but Mercy stirred against him. He took a deep breath, remembering Maria's warnings. Instead of reacting, he turned away, focusing on checking the wagon's cargo straps. Miguel emerged with their payment, and they quickly gathered the supplies Maria had requested. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them relieved to leave town behind. That evening, after Mercy was asleep in her makeshift crib, Kevin found Maria in the kitchen, recording the day's earnings in her ledger. "I need to do something," he said, settling into a chair. "Been thinking on it all day. I want to petition the judge for proper custody papers, make everything legal and right for Mercy." Maria set down her pencil, considering his words. "It won't be easy. Judge Wilson has been in Whitford's pocket for years. The law here—" She shook her head. "It can be bought, like everything else." "Don't matter if it's easy," Kevin said firmly. "That baby girl deserves better than living under threats. Need to make sure nobody can take her from me." "Your heart's in the right place," Maria said softly. "But be careful. Starting this fight might bring trouble down on all our heads." Kevin nodded, understanding her concern, but his mind was made up. He'd walked into the desert ready to die, and instead found a reason to live. Now he would fight with everything he had to protect that gift. "Thank you," he said simply, "for all you've done for us. Whatever comes next, I'm grateful." Maria reached across the table and briefly squeezed his hand. No more words were needed. They both understood the cost of fighting for family, and they both knew it was worth any price. Monday's first light hadn't yet touched the horizon when Kevin saddled his horse. The pre-dawn air held a bite that made Mercy burrow deeper against his chest, swaddled securely in her blanket beneath his coat. Maria stood in the doorway of her ranch house, holding a lantern. "You have enough provisions?" she asked, handing him a cloth-wrapped package. "Fresh tortillas and dried beef for the journey." "Much obliged," Kevin said, securing the food in his saddlebags. "Should make it to Judge Harrison's office by tomorrow afternoon if we push steady." The horse shifted beneath him, eager to move in the cool morning air. Kevin adjusted his hat, checked Mercy one last time, and gave Maria a respectful nod. "We'll be back soon as we can." As his mount's hooves carried them beyond the ranch boundary, Kevin watched the eastern sky lighten. The familiar weight of his revolver rode at his hip. But today it wasn't outlaws or wild animals that worried him. It was paperwork and laws that could separate him from Mercy. The morning passed in steady riding, Kevin keeping to a pace that wouldn't jostle the baby too much. When the sun climbed high, he stopped at a creek to water his horse and tend to Mercy's needs. She cooed at him as he changed her, tiny fingers grabbing at his weathered hands. "You're a right miracle, you know that," he murmured, carefully pinning fresh cloth around her. "Never thought I'd be doing this, but here we are." Back in the saddle, Kevin's thoughts drifted to those dark days before finding her. He remembered the weight of his gun, how he'd planned to use that last bullet on himself once the desert sun had worn him down enough. Now that same weapon was just a tool for protecting this new life he'd been given. The afternoon stretched long, heat shimmering off distant rocks. Kevin kept them moving, stopping only when necessary. As evening approached, he found a sheltered spot near a dry creek bed to make camp. While Mercy slept in a nest of blankets, he built a small fire and heated water for her milk. The stars emerged, brilliant and clear in the desert sky. Kevin fed Mercy by firelight, humming fragments of hymns his mother had sung long ago. The baby's trust in him still amazed him, how her tiny hand would grip his finger, how she settled at the sound of his voice. "Reckon we're saving each other," he whispered to her sleeping form. "You gave me purpose when I'd lost mine. Now I aim to make sure you have a future." Dawn found them back on the trail, pushing toward the next town. By mid-afternoon of the second day, they reached the small settlement where Judge Harrison kept his office. The courthouse was a modest wooden building, its fresh paint standing out among the dusty surroundings. Kevin dismounted stiffly, his muscles protesting after 2 days in the saddle. He straightened his coat and hat, wanting to present a respectable appearance despite the trail dust. Mercy was awake, peering around with bright eyes as he carried her up the courthouse steps. Inside, the clerk directed them to the judge's chamber. Judge Harrison was a lean man with silver hair and keen eyes that missed nothing as Kevin entered. The judge gestured to a chair, watching as Kevin carefully settled with Mercy. "What brings you before me today?" Harrison asked, his voice neutral but not unkind. Kevin cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I'm here about this child. Found her abandoned in the desert 2 weeks back, half dead from exposure. I aim to be her legal guardian, raise her proper." The judge leaned forward, studying both man and baby. "Tell me the full circumstances." Kevin recounted that morning in the desert, his discovery of Mercy, the mission sister's inability to take her, and his decision to care for her himself. He kept his voice steady, though his heart pounded at the memory of how close they both had come to dying that day. "The blanket she was wrapped in, it's a patchy make," Kevin admitted, knowing honesty was crucial. But she was left to die out there. Whatever her blood, she's an innocent child needing care. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I can see you're sincere, Mr. Boone, but the law requires more than good intentions. We need proper documentation. What kind of documentation? Kevin asked, trying to keep the worry from his voice. Bring me a midwife's record of birth, or a preacher's written account of the circumstances. If the mother has passed, evidence of that would help establish the child's orphan status. The judge picked up his pen. These territories are filling with people. We need proper records, especially in cases involving children. Kevin's heart sank, but he kept his voice level. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. You seem like a decent man, Mr. Boone. Get me the documentation, and I'll help make this legal and proper. The judge's eyes softened as he looked at Mercy. Every child deserves a secure future. Outside the courthouse, Kevin studied the setting sun. They needed to start back, but first he had one more stop to make. The telegraph office was still open, its operator cleaning the day's brass instruments. Kevin paid for a message to Maria. Need help with proof for judge stop midwife record or preacher statement. Stop home in 3 days. Stop Kevin and Mercy safe stop. The return journey felt longer, though Kevin pushed as hard as he dared with Mercy. They camped 2 nights under vast desert skies, his determination growing with each mile. Whatever it took, he would secure Mercy's future. The 3rd evening, they finally spotted Maria's ranch in the distance. Kevin's horse perked up, recognizing home. As they rode into the yard, Maria emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome back," she called, coming to help him dismount. Her experienced eyes checked both him and Mercy. "You're tired, but you made it." Kevin nodded, muscles aching as he slid from the saddle. "Judge seems fair-minded. Says he'll help if we can get proper documentation." Maria's face brightened. "I've already started gathering what we can. Come inside. You need food and rest, then we'll talk about what comes next." Kevin followed her toward the house, Mercy sleeping peacefully against him. The sun was setting behind them, painting the adobe walls golden. One step closer, he thought. One step closer to making this miracle official. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows across the churchyard as people filed out of the small adobe building after service. Kevin stood near the entrance, Mercy bundled against his chest, while Maria spoke quietly with several of the congregation members. The baby reached toward the sleeve of his freshly pressed shirt, which Maria had insisted he wear. Reverend Holloway emerged last, closing the heavy wooden door behind him. His lean frame cast a shadow in the morning light as he paused on the church steps, watching his flock disperse. Kevin drew a deep breath and approached, Maria falling into step beside him. "Reverend," Kevin said, touching the brim of his hat. "Might we have a word?" The preacher's weathered face creased with subtle concern, but he nodded. "Of course. Let's step into my study." Inside, the small room smelled of leather-bound books and lamp oil. A worn desk dominated the space, scattered with papers and well-used Bibles. Reverend Holloway settled behind it while Kevin and Maria took the 2 chairs opposite. Mercy squirmed in Kevin's arms, her dark eyes fixed on the Reverend's silver-streaked beard. "What troubles you?" Holloway asked, folding his hands on the desk. Kevin cleared his throat. "I'm petitioning Judge Harrison for legal guardianship of Mercy. He needs supporting testimony from respected members of the community." The Reverend's expression tightened. "I see." He glanced toward the window where several church members still lingered in the yard. "You understand my position is delicate. Many here fear drawing Apache attention." "She's just a baby," Maria interjected softly. "Abandoned to die in the desert." "Yes, but," Holloway began, then stopped as Mercy suddenly reached toward him, tiny fingers grasping at air. Without thinking, he leaned forward, and she caught hold of his beard, letting out a delighted gurgle. The Reverend's stern expression cracked. He gently disentangled her hand, but kept hold of her tiny fingers. "She has a strong grip," he murmured. "Strong spirit, too," Kevin said. "Found her near dead from the sun, but she held on. Reckon the Lord had his reasons for putting her in my path that day." Holloway studied Kevin's face. "You were headed into the desert to die yourself, weren't you?" Kevin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. Was carrying more guilt than I could bear, but finding her—" He looked down at Mercy. "Changed everything?" The Reverend sat back, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "I've watched you these past weeks, Kevin. Seen how you care for her, bring her to services. Even when folks whisper, you keep your dignity." He sighed deeply. "It won't be popular, but I'll write my testimony. Truth needs speaking, especially when it's hard." "Thank you, Reverend," Kevin said, his voice rough with emotion. Maria reached into her shawl and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "I have something else that might help." She placed it on the desk. "My midwife records." The Reverend opened the worn volume, turning pages covered in neat script. Maria leaned forward, pointing to an entry from several months back. "Here," she said. "I treated her mother briefly. Anaba was her name, a young woman, part Apache, part white. She was early in her pregnancy then, afraid and alone. I gave her what care I could, but she disappeared after that one visit." Holloway read the entry carefully. "This could be significant. It establishes the mother's identity, her heritage." He looked up at Kevin. "Did you find any sign of her near where you discovered the baby?" Kevin shook his head. "No, sir. Just Mercy, wrapped in that blanket. No tracks, no other signs." The Reverend nodded solemnly. "I'll include that in my statement. The abandonment, your finding her, it all speaks to God's hand at work." He picked up his pen. "Give me until tomorrow to write this properly. I want my words to carry weight with Judge Harrison." "Much obliged," Kevin said, standing carefully so as not to disturb Mercy, who had dozed off against his chest. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, baking the packed earth of the churchyard. Maria's teenage son, Miguel, waited with their wagon, holding the reins of Kevin's horse. The boy's face brightened as they approached. "How did it go?" he asked eagerly. "Well enough," Maria answered, climbing onto the wagon seat. "The Reverend will help." Kevin mounted his horse, adjusting Mercy in her sling. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But as they passed through town, he noticed unfamiliar faces watching from the saloon porch. Their hard stares followed him until they turned onto the ranch road. The day passed in normal routine, feeding livestock, checking fences, preparing meals. As evening approached, Maria insisted Kevin join them for supper, as had become their custom. The adobe kitchen was warm from the cooking fire, filled with the smell of beans and fresh tortillas. Miguel helped his mother serve, then settled at the rough wooden table. He pushed his food around his plate for a moment before looking up at Kevin. "Will you stay here?" he asked suddenly. "With us? Even after the judge gives you papers for Mercy?" The question caught Kevin off guard. He glanced at Maria, who kept her eyes on her plate, then back to the boy's earnest face. "Truth is, I'm not sure what comes next," Kevin admitted. "But I promise you this, whatever happens, I won't be taking Mercy far. She needs good people around her, people who care." Miguel nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good, she likes it here, and Mama smiles more now." "Miguel," Maria scolded softly, but there was no real anger in her voice. After the dishes were cleared, Kevin stepped outside with Mercy. The desert night was settling in, stars pricking through the darkening sky. In the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild songs echoing off the hills. Kevin shifted Mercy to one arm and pulled Sister Agnes's crucifix from his shirt pocket. The small silver cross caught the last light of day as he held it, remembering the sister's kind face, her quiet blessing. He closed his fingers around it, offering up a silent prayer for guidance and protection. But even as he prayed, unease stirred in his gut. Those strangers in town, their stares had held more than simple prejudice. Something about their bearing, the way they watched, reminded him of men he'd known during the war. Men who acted on orders, not personal feeling. A soft step behind him made him turn. Maria stood in the doorway, lamplight spilling around her. "You look troubled," she said. "Just thinking," he replied, tucking the crucifix away. "Grateful for your help today. That record book could make all the difference." She nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "God puts people in our path for a reason, Kevin. Sometimes we're meant to help carry each other's burdens." He looked down at Mercy, peaceful in his arms. "Reckon you're right about that." The coyotes called again, closer now, their voices rising and falling in the gathering dark. Kevin held Mercy a little tighter, knowing that tomorrow would bring them one step closer to making her truly his daughter, or reveal new challenges they'd have to face together. The afternoon sun beat down on Kevin's back as he hammered another nail into the corral post. 2 days had passed since their meeting with Reverend Holloway, and the steady work helped calm his nerves while he waited for the promised testimony. Maria's sheep grazed nearby, their bells tinkling softly in the desert breeze. Mercy napped in a makeshift cradle, a wooden fruit crate padded with blankets, under the shade of a gnarled mesquite tree. Kevin paused his work every few minutes to check on her, smiling at her peaceful expression. The thunder of approaching hooves broke the quiet. Kevin straightened, shielding his eyes against the sun. 4 riders approached, their horses kicking up dust clouds. His hand instinctively moved toward his hip, though he'd stopped wearing his gun while working the ranch. The men pulled up short of the corral. Their clothes were too fine for common cowboys, store-bought boots, pressed shirts, and leather vests that had never seen real ranch work. The leader, a sharp-featured man with a waxed mustache, produced an envelope sealed with red wax. "Kevin Boone?" the man called out, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's right." Kevin moved closer to Mercy's cradle, keeping his stance casual but ready. The rider held up the envelope. "We represent Mr. Harlan Whitford, president of the Western Territory Railroad Company." He paused for effect. "We're here about the child." Kevin's chest tightened. What child would that be? "The one you found in the desert." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Whitford has reason to believe she's his granddaughter, the daughter of his late son, Thomas." "That's so." Kevin kept his voice level, though his heart hammered. "And how'd he figure that?" The second rider, older with graying temples, spoke up. "Thomas Whitford was known to associate with local women during his survey work, before his unfortunate passing 6 months ago." "The baby's mother was Apache," Kevin said firmly. "She left her child to God's care, not your employer's." The men exchanged amused glances. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that startled a nearby sheep. "An Apache squaw's word against the Whitford family? Mr. Whitford intends to ensure his granddaughter is raised properly, with all the advantages his position affords." "Advantages?" Kevin's voice roughened. "Like denying half her blood? Her mother's people?" "Be reasonable, Boone," the older rider said. "You're facing charges of kidnapping if you resist. Mr. Whitford has connections throughout the territory. Judges, marshals, governors. Save yourself the trouble." Behind them, Kevin caught movement. Maria's son, Miguel, had been working in the vegetable patch. The boy slipped away, running toward the cluster of neighboring ranches. "Good lad." "The child stays with me," Kevin said. "I found her dying in the sand. God put her in my path, and I aim to honor that trust." The leader's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. Mr. Whitford doesn't take kindly to being refused." He reached into his vest. "We'll leave this documentation with you. Consider it carefully." He tossed the envelope, which landed in the dust at Kevin's feet. In the distance, voices carried on the wind. Miguel returning with neighbors. The riders heard it too. "We'll be back," the leader said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They wheeled their horses around and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Kevin snatched up the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. He broke the seal and pulled out several papers, legal documents claiming Whitford's right to the child, threats of prosecution, offers of compensation for surrendering her. "Kevin?" Maria hurried from the house, her face tight with concern. "Miguel told me about the riders. Who were they?" He handed her the papers. "Whitford's men. Railroad baron." He ran a hand through his hair. "Claims Mercy's his granddaughter." Maria scanned the documents, her expression darkening. "Dios mío, these are serious threats. What he wants is serious too, trying to buy a child like she's railroad stock." Kevin walked to Mercy's cradle. She was awake now, watching him with those solemn dark eyes that seemed too wise for her age. "He's got money, influence, everything I don't." "You have truth," Maria said firmly. "And God's favor. The Reverend will testify. We have my records. Records that any expensive lawyer could discredit." Kevin lifted Mercy, holding her close. "Whitford could bury us in court papers until I'm broke and jailed." The sun was setting now, painting the desert in deep oranges and purples. Kevin paced the yard while Maria prepared supper, his mind churning through options. Mercy fussed until he hummed an old hymn, one his mother used to sing. After a simple meal of beans and tortillas, Kevin sat by lamplight in the bunkhouse, Mercy sleeping against his chest. The envelope from Whitford lay on the rough table like a snake coiled to strike. He'd read the papers a dozen times, searching for weakness, finding none. A soft knock announced Maria. She entered carrying a cup of coffee, which she set before him. "You need rest," she said gently. "You've been pacing for hours. Can't rest." He shifted Mercy carefully. "Keep thinking about what's coming. Whitford won't wait long. Men like him aren't used to being refused." Maria sat across from him. "Then we pray, and we act in faith, not fear." Kevin nodded slowly. "That's why I have to leave before dawn. Get to Judge Harrison with your records before Whitford can poison the well." "Alone?" Maria's brow furrowed. "It's not safe. Safer than waiting for Whitford to send the law." Kevin touched Mercy's soft hair. "If I can get the judge to hear our evidence first, see the truth of it. And if you can't?" Kevin met her worried gaze. "Then at least I'll have tried. For her sake." Maria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Let me pack you food for the journey." The hours till dawn crept by. Kevin dozed fitfully in his chair, waking at every sound. Mercy slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around her young life. As the sky began to lighten, he gathered his few belongings and the precious midwife records. Maria was waiting in the yard with a bundle of food and fresh water for his canteen. She helped him secure Mercy in her sling, checking the knots twice. "God go with you," she whispered, making the sign of the cross over them both. Kevin mounted carefully, settling Mercy against him. The morning star still hung bright in the pale eastern sky as he turned his horse toward the judge's town. Behind him, Maria stood watching, her shawl drawn tight against the pre-dawn chill. The road ahead stretched long and uncertain, but Kevin felt a strange peace beneath his worry. Whatever came, he would face it standing firm in the truth. He touched the crucifix in his pocket and urged his horse forward, praying his journey would end in justice rather than ruin. Mercy stirred against him, making the soft morning sounds he'd come to love. Kevin adjusted her blanket, protecting her from the cool morning air. Whatever power Whitford held, money, influence, or the law itself, Kevin knew his cause was right. God had entrusted this child to his care, and with his help, he would see her safe. The sun began to rise, painting the eastern sky in brilliant golds and pinks. Kevin kept his horse at a steady pace, knowing they had many miles ahead. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and creosote, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called, a reminder that they weren't entirely alone on this vast frontier. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Kevin guided his horse along the dusty trail. 2 days had passed since leaving Maria's ranch, and the weather threatened to turn. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, rolling closer with each passing hour. He adjusted the oilskin cloth protecting Mercy from the wind, which carried the sharp scent of coming rain. "Easy now," he murmured, both to the baby and his mount. The horse's ears flicked back, sensing his tension. They had seen no other travelers since morning, but Kevin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mercy fussed against his chest, her small face scrunching in discomfort. The constant motion of riding had made her cranky, and Kevin's arms ached from trying to cushion her from the jolts. He checked the sun's position. Perhaps 2 hours of daylight remained. "Just a little further, little one," he whispered, touching her cheek. "We'll find a place to rest soon." The trail wound through rocky terrain dotted with mesquite and scrub brush. Kevin scanned the landscape, looking for suitable shelter from the approaching storm. A grove of larger mesquite trees caught his eye, offering some protection from the wind. He turned his horse toward it, aware of how exposed they were on the open trail. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Kevin dismounted beneath the twisted branches. He worked quickly, setting up a small camp while keeping Mercy close. The baby whimpered as thunder cracked overhead, and Kevin hummed softly to calm her. "Sounds worse than it is," he said, settling her in a nest of blankets while he gathered dry wood for a small fire. The flames caught just as the rain began in earnest, drumming against the mesquite leaves above them. Kevin warmed some milk for Mercy, watching the darkness gather between the trees. His Winchester rifle lay within easy reach, more from habit than specific worry. Still, something felt wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he found himself straining to hear anything beyond the rain and thunder. A twig snapped. Kevin's hand moved to his revolver, but he wasn't fast enough. Dark figures emerged from the shadows, and he counted at least 4 men surrounding the camp. Their faces were hard in the firelight, and he recognized 2 from Whitford's ranch. "Well, well," said the leader, water dripping from his hat brim. "Looks like we caught ourselves a kidnapper." Kevin rose, slowly, keeping himself between the men and Mercy. "You know that's not true. Way we hear it, you stole Mr. Whitford's granddaughter." Another man stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. "That's a hanging offense." "I found her abandoned," Kevin said evenly. "I'm taking her to the judge to make things legal." The leader spat into the mud. "Only place you're going is back to face charges. Hand over the baby." "No." Kevin's voice was steel. They rushed him then, from multiple directions. Kevin managed to block the first punch, but a second caught him above his eye, splitting the skin. He staggered, feeling blood trickle down his face. 2 men grabbed his arms while another moved toward Mercy. "Don't touch her!" Kevin roared. He wrenched one arm free and drew his revolver in a single motion, firing into the air. The gunshot cracked louder than the thunder, spooking the horses and sending the men scrambling for cover. Kevin seized his chance. He snatched Mercy and her blanket, then vaulted onto his startled horse. Shots rang out behind him as he spurred the animal forward, crashing through the brush into the rain-soaked night. "Hold on, little one," he gasped, hunching over to shield her as they galloped through the darkness. Mercy wailed in terror, her cries cutting through the storm. Behind them, he heard shouts and the thunder of pursuing hooves. Kevin rode hard, letting his horse pick its way through the treacherous terrain. Rain stung his face, mixing with the blood from his wound. He had no idea how long they rode, time measured only in the pounding of hooves and Mercy's frightened cries. Finally, the sound of pursuit faded. Kevin slowed his exhausted mount, realizing his canteen had been lost in the flight. Mercy still trembled against him, but her cries had quieted to hiccuping sobs. He touched her face, checking for injury, and found only tears. "I've got you," he whispered hoarsely. I've got you." They rode through the night, Kevin fighting to stay alert despite his throbbing head. When the sun finally rose, he found himself on the outskirts of a small town he didn't recognize. His horse stumbled, nearly spent, as they made their way down the muddy main street. A few early risers stopped to stare at the bloody, mud-covered stranger clutching a baby. An older man hurried forward, reaching to steady Kevin as he swayed in the saddle. "Lord above, man. You need help?" Kevin nodded weakly. "Telegraph office. Need to send a wire?" "This way." The man helped Kevin dismount, calling to others to tend to his horse. "Name's Tucker. Got a room above my store if you need it." Kevin followed him to the telegraph office, holding Mercy close. The operator looked up in alarm at their appearance, but quickly set to work when Kevin pressed coins into his hand. The message to Maria was brief. "Men after us. Headed to judge. Pray." Tucker tried to convince Kevin to see the town doctor, but Kevin refused to stop. After purchasing supplies and filling his canteen, he led his now-rested horse toward the livery stable on the edge of town. "At least rest a few hours," Tucker urged. "You're about to fall over." Kevin knew he was right. The stable was warm and quiet, smelling of hay and horses. In a corner stall, he made a bed of fresh straw, finally allowing his battered body to sink down. Mercy lay against his chest, her small fingers curled into his shirt. As exhaustion pulled him toward sleep, Kevin studied her peaceful face. Something had changed during their desperate night ride. The bond between them, already strong, had crystallized into something unbreakable. He wasn't just her rescuer anymore. He was her father in every way that mattered. The truth of it settled in his heart with the weight of destiny. "Sleep now, my daughter," he whispered, the word feeling right on his tongue. "Your pa's here." His last conscious thought was a prayer of thanks that God had led him to that spot in the desert where a crying baby had saved his life. Now, he would spend the rest of his days ensuring she had a life worth living. The afternoon sun slanted through the stable's high windows as Kevin drifted into uneasy sleep, one hand resting protectively on Mercy's back. Whatever came next, their fates were bound together. No piece of paper, no wealthy railroad baron could change that simple truth. The eastern sky blushed pink as Kevin guided his weary horse down the last stretch of road toward the courthouse. His head still throbbed where Whitford's men had struck him, and dried blood crusted above his eye. But none of that mattered now. Mercy slept against his chest, her tiny breaths steady and warm through his shirt. The town was just beginning to stir. A shop owner swept his wooden walkway, pausing to stare as Kevin rode past. Women heading to market whispered behind their hands, pointing at the strange sight of a battered man cradling a baby. Kevin kept his eyes forward, focused on the courthouse's weather-worn columns rising at the end of the street. He dismounted carefully, mindful not to wake Mercy. The leather satchel containing Maria's midwife records and Reverend Holloway's letter felt heavy against his side. Each step up the courthouse stairs echoed in the morning quiet. Inside, oil lamps cast yellow light across dark wood panels, and the smell of dust and old paper filled the air. The judge's clerk looked up from his desk, eyes widening at Kevin's appearance. "Sir, I need to see Judge Harrison," Kevin said, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "It's about adopting this child. I have. Documents he requested." The clerk hesitated, then nodded toward a bench. "Wait here. He arrives early most days." Kevin sat, adjusting Mercy in his arms. She stirred, dark eyes blinking open, and he touched her cheek gently. "Almost there, little one. Almost there." The minutes crawled by. Kevin's body ached for rest, but he forced himself to sit straight, to look presentable despite his injuries. When heavy footsteps finally approached, he rose to meet Judge Harrison's questioning gaze. "You've seen better days, Mr. Boone," the judge said, taking in Kevin's condition. "Yes, sir, but I have what you asked for." Kevin followed him into the courtroom, where morning light streamed through tall windows. He carefully extracted the documents from his satchel. laying them on the judge's desk. A midwife's record of the mother, Annaba, and a letter from Reverend Holloway speaking to my character and care of the child. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles, beginning to examine the papers. The scratch of his pen filled the quiet room as he made notes. Kevin held his breath, bouncing Mercy slightly when she started to fuss. The courtroom doors suddenly burst open. 3 men in expensive suits strode in, followed by 2 deputies. Kevin recognized Whitford's chief lawyer, Peterson, from his previous visits to town. "Your Honor," Peterson announced, "we have serious charges to file." He slapped a document onto the judge's desk. "This man kidnapped Harlan Whitford's granddaughter. We demand his immediate arrest." Kevin's heart pounded. "That's a lie. I found her abandoned." "Deputies," Peterson cut in. "Seize him. He's dangerous." Everything happened too quickly. The deputies grabbed Kevin's arms as Mercy began to wail. One of Whitford's men reached for the baby. "No." Kevin struggled, but his exhaustion betrayed him. "Please, she needs me. She's my daughter." "Take him to jail," the judge ordered, looking troubled but resigned. "We'll sort this out properly." Kevin fought as they dragged him away, his boots scraping across the wooden floor. Mercy's cries pierced his heart as Whitford's man carried her toward the door. Her small hand reached out, fingers grasping at the air between them. "Mercy!" Kevin's voice broke. "I'll come for you, I promise!" The cell door clanged shut, the sound as final as a coffin lid. Kevin sank onto the narrow cot, his whole body shaking. The familiar weight of despair settled over him like the desert heat that had nearly claimed his life. He could still hear Mercy's cries echoing in his mind. Hours passed in a fog of grief and exhaustion. Kevin paced the small cell 5 steps each way, remembering how it felt to hold Mercy while she slept. The desert had seemed like salvation once, an escape from his guilt and pain. Now it haunted him, not because of his own near death, but because that's where Mercy had found him, had given him reason to live again. As evening approached, boots echoed on the jailhouse floor. Kevin looked up to see Reverend Holloway standing before his cell, hat in hand. "They wouldn't let me speak at the courthouse," the Reverend said softly. "I came as soon as I heard." Kevin gripped the iron bars. "They took her. She'll think I abandoned her." "No." Reverend Holloway stepped closer. "That child knows love when she feels it, and she feels yours." "What am I supposed to do now?" Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. "I promise to protect her." The Reverend reached through the bars, gripping Kevin's shoulder. "Remember why God led you to her that day? The vow you made in the desert wasn't for yourself. It was for her." Kevin closed his eyes, remembering the moment he'd first heard Mercy's cry cutting through his despair. How clear God's purpose had seemed then. "Trust in His mercy," Reverend Holloway continued. "He didn't bring you this far to abandon either of you now." After the Reverend left, Kevin knelt beside the cot in the growing darkness. For the first time since his days as a soldier, he prayed with his whole heart, not for himself, but for the tiny soul who had saved him from the desert's embrace. "Lord," he whispered, "give me strength to fight this battle. Show me the way back to her. Let your justice prevail." The night deepened around him, but Kevin kept praying, his words a quiet stream of faith and determination. He would not give up. Somewhere out there, Mercy needed him, and by God's grace, he would find a way to keep his promise to her. Through the barred window, stars wheeled slowly across the sky. Kevin remained on his knees, no longer the broken man who had walked into the desert seeking death. Now he was a father, praying for the chance to protect the daughter Providence had entrusted to his care. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same fierce love that had driven him to shield her from Whitford's men in the storm. The vow he'd made in the desert had indeed been for her. And he would keep it, even from behind these bars, until justice opened a path to freedom and reunion. Morning sunlight crept through the iron bars of Kevin's cell, painting golden stripes across the rough wooden floor. He had been pacing since dawn, the steady thud of his boots marking time like a metronome. His fists clenched and unclenched as he walked, 5 steps one way, turn, 5 steps back. The jail smelled of old straw and coffee from the deputy's desk. Outside, a rooster crowed, and the town began to stir. Kevin paused at the window, pressing his forehead against the cool bars. Somewhere out there, Mercy was waking too. Was she crying for him? Did anyone at Whitford's mansion know how to comfort her? Boot heels clicked on the wooden walkway outside. Kevin turned as Maria Sanchez appeared at his cell, her teenage son Miguel carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle. The sight of friendly faces made his throat tight. "We brought you something," Maria said softly, unwrapping fresh bread and dried meat. She pressed them through the bars. "You need your strength today." Kevin accepted the food with trembling hands. "How is the town talking?" "What are they saying?" Maria's dark eyes held both worry and hope. "People are divided. Some believe Whitford's claims about his son being the father. But others—" She glanced at Miguel, who nodded encouragement. "Others have seen how you care for her. They remember how you worked without complaint, how you learned to tend her. The women especially. They know true fatherhood when they see it." "It won't matter what they think if Whitford's lawyers have their way," Kevin said, breaking off a piece of bread. The first bite reminded him how long it had been since he'd eaten. "Don't lose heart," Maria urged. "Reverend Holloway was at our ranch at dawn. He's riding to file a formal petition with the court. There will be a proper hearing. You'll have your chance to speak truth." Kevin's hands stilled. "A hearing?" "Yes. The whole town's talking about it." Miguel spoke up. "They say the judge can't ignore a preacher's petition, even with Whitford's money involved." Kevin moved closer to the bars. "Have you seen her? Have you heard anything about how she's being treated?" Maria shook her head. "Whitford's mansion is like a fortress, but his housekeeper attends our church. She says Mercy cries through the night, won't take a bottle." Her voice softened. "She knows who her father is, Kevin. She remembers your love." Kevin turned away, not wanting them to see the tears that threatened. He walked to the window again, gripping the bars until his knuckles went white. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning away the last traces of dawn mist from the hills. "We'll testify for you," Maria said firmly, "about how we watched you learn to care for her, how you chose her welfare over your own comfort time and again." Kevin nodded, not trusting his voice. When he finally spoke, the words came rough with emotion. "Thank you, both of you." They stayed a while longer, sharing what news they could. After they left, Kevin forced himself to eat, knowing he would need strength for whatever lay ahead. The bread tasted like dust in his mouth, but he finished every bite. The afternoon crawled by in tense anticipation. Kevin alternated between pacing and sitting on his cot, head bowed in prayer. Around 3 o'clock, boots echoed in the corridor again. This time it was Reverend Holloway, his black coat dusty from riding. "It's done," the Reverend announced. "The petition is filed. Judge Harrison has called for a full hearing tomorrow morning." Kevin stood. "Tomorrow?" 9 o'clock sharp." Reverend Holloway gripped the cell bars. "The whole town's talking about it. The courthouse will be packed. Whitford? His lawyers are already preparing their case." The Reverend's face grew serious. "They'll try to paint you as a desperate man, maybe even dangerous. They'll use your military past against you, suggest the war broke something in you." Kevin laughed bitterly. "They're not wrong about that last part." "No," Reverend Holloway said firmly. "Being broken isn't the same as being wrong. God uses broken vessels, Kevin. Remember that." After the Reverend left, Kevin lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. As darkness fell, his mind wandered back to that morning in the desert. He could still feel the grit of sand under his knees, taste the despair that had driven him to seek oblivion under that merciless sun. His hand crept to the small crucifix Sister Agnes had given him, still hanging from his neck. Sleep came in fitful bursts. In his dreams, he walked the desert again. But this time Mercy's cry echoed from every direction. He ran through shifting dunes, following the sound, his heart pounding with desperation to reach her. He woke with tears on his face, the echo of her cries still ringing in his ears. Dawn broke clear and cold. The deputy brought him a basin of water and a razor, along with the cleanest clothes they could find. Kevin washed and shaved carefully, determined to face the court with dignity. As he straightened his collar, he caught his reflection in the small mirror they'd provided. The man looking back at him was no longer the broken soldier who had walked into the desert to die. This was a father, ready to fight for his child. By 8:30, the sound of gathered crowds filtered through his window. Wagons and buggies creaked on the street, and voices murmured with anticipation. At 8:45, the deputy arrived to escort him to the courthouse. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they crossed the street. Kevin's shackles clinked with each step, drawing stares from the townspeople lined up outside the courthouse. Some faces showed sympathy, others scorn. He kept his eyes forward, climbing the steps with measured stride. Inside, the courtroom was already full. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. The wooden benches creaked with the weight of spectators. Kevin saw Maria and Miguel seated near the front, and Reverend Holloway standing by the rail that separated observers from participants. The deputy led him to a chair beside the public defender who had been assigned to his case. The man looked nervous, shuffling papers without meeting Kevin's eyes. On the other side of the aisle, Whitford's 3 lawyers arranged documents with practiced efficiency. A door opened at the back of the courtroom. Harlan Whitford entered, his silver hair gleaming, his suit immaculate. He moved like a man accustomed to commanding attention, nodding to various townspeople as he took his seat. His confidence filled the room like a physical presence. Kevin's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. This was the man who held Mercy now, who thought he could buy her heritage and erase her story. The man who would raise her to deny half of who she was. "All rise," the bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Harrison presiding." The judge entered, his black robes swirling. Everyone stood until he took his seat and gestured for them to sit. He surveyed the packed courtroom with stern eyes before speaking. "We are here to determine the rightful custody of the infant known as Mercy, currently in the care of Mr. Harlan Whitford." The judge's gaze fell on Kevin. "Mr. Boone, you claim to have found this child abandoned in the desert and seek to adopt her. Mr. Whitford claims she is his granddaughter, the daughter of his late son, James. Both parties will have the opportunity to present their case." He nodded to Whitford's chief lawyer. "Mr. Peterson, you may begin." Peterson rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we will prove that the child in question is indeed the natural heir of the Whitford family, and that Mr. Boone's actions amount to kidnapping. We have documents." Kevin sat straight in his chair, his face composed despite the chains at his wrists. He could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispers behind raised hands. But none of that mattered now. Soon he would tell his story, the true story, of walking into the desert that morning, ready to die, and hearing a baby's cry that called him back to life. He glanced at Maria, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Reverend Holloway stood quietly, Bible in hand, ready to speak truth when called. The morning sun climbed higher, filling the courtroom with light as Kevin prepared to fight for the daughter Providence had entrusted to his care. "Mr. Peterson, you may proceed with your opening statement," Judge Harrison said, his weathered face impassive beneath gray brows. Whitford's lawyer rose with practiced grace, adjusting his silk vest. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. The child known as Mercy is the natural heir to the Whitford family legacy. Her father, the late James Whitford, was Mr. Harlan Whitford's only son. We have testimony from ranch hands who witnessed James's association with a native woman last spring. He paused delicately. The timing aligns perfectly with the infant's age. Kevin watched the lawyer pace before the bench, each polished boot step clicking against wooden floorboards. The man's words dripped with carefully crafted sympathy. Mr. Boone, while perhaps well-intentioned, took it upon himself to abscond with this child, this Whitford heir, denying her birthright. A birthright, Your Honor, that includes not only material comfort, but education, social standing, and a proper upbringing among her true family. In the gallery, townsfolk shifted and whispered. Kevin felt their stares, but kept his eyes forward, shoulders straight despite his shackles. We will demonstrate that Mr. Boone, a rootless drifter with a history of military violence, is entirely unsuited to raise a child of gentle breeding. The infant belongs with her grandfather, who can provide every advantage. Peterson gestured expansively toward Whitford, who sat radiating authority in his tailored suit. When Peterson finished, Kevin's court-appointed defender rose nervously. Your Honor, we'll show that Mr. Boone found this child abandoned, saved her life at great personal risk, and has cared for her devotedly these past months. We have witnesses to his character and capability as a father. The judge nodded. Call your first witness. The defense calls Kevin Boone. Kevin stood carefully, the chains at his wrists catching morning light. He made his way to the witness stand, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. After being sworn in, he settled into the hard wooden chair. Mr. Boone, his lawyer began, please tell the court exactly how you came to find the child. Kevin drew a slow breath. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. I walked into the desert at dawn 3 months ago. I had no plan to return. He paused, the memory of that burning despair still raw. I was seeking an end, but God had other plans. He described the long hours under the merciless sun, his water running low until that faint cry reached him. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks, but there she was, wrapped in a Navajo blanket, hidden beneath a creosote bush. She was barely breathing but alive. And what did you do then? I couldn't leave her. The choice was made the moment I heard her cry. I gave her the last of my water and turned back toward the mission I'd passed 2 days before. Even though this meant risking your own life. Yes, sir. Though truth be told, she saved mine as much as I saved hers. The questioning continued as Kevin recounted those first desperate days, the sisters at the mission, the hostile reception in dry wells, finding work and shelter at Maria's ranch. His voice grew stronger as he described learning to care for Mercy, the nights spent walking her, the joy of her first smile. During cross-examination, Peterson's tone grew sharp. Is it not true, Mr. Boone, that you were a cavalry officer, trained in killing? I served in the Union Army, yes. And how many men died under your command? Kevin's jaw tightened. Too many. Would you say the war left you unstable? Prone to rash decisions? I carried guilt, sir, but finding Mercy gave me purpose again. Purpose? Peterson's lip curled. Or perhaps opportunity? A chance to gain sympathy? To insert yourself into a wealthy family's affairs? Objection, Your Honor, Kevin's lawyer called out. Sustained, the judge ruled. Watch your tone, Mr. Peterson. When Kevin stepped down, Reverend Holloway took the stand. The preacher's testimony was measured but powerful. I've watched Mr. Boone these past months, he said. Seen him in church each Sunday holding that child like she was made of gold. Seen him learn patience, gentleness. The man who walked into my church that first day was broken. The man before you now has been remade by love and grace. Maria testified next, her accent strong but her words clear. She described Kevin's dedication to learning proper infant care, his tireless work to earn Mercy's keep, the tender way he sang hymns to soothe the baby's crying. Then she opened her midwife's record book. I treated the mother, Annaba, last spring. She was Apache, running from something or someone. She was already with child then. Maria's dark eyes met Whitford's cold stare. She died in childbirth, alone in the desert. These are my records, signed and dated. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison called for order, his gavel cracking sharp against wood. When Whitford took the stand, his commanding presence filled the room. My son James was young, impetuous. He may have been indiscreet, but that child carries Whitford blood. She deserves better than a saddle tramp's care. He fixed Kevin with a withering look. Look at him. A drifter, a broken soldier, living off charity. What future can he offer my granddaughter? What society? What education? His voice dripped with disdain. The child belongs with her true family. At the mid-morning recess, Kevin was led back to a holding cell adjacent to the courthouse. Alone, he sank onto the narrow bench, emotionally drained. His fingers found Sister Agnes's crucifix, warm against his chest. Bowing his head, he prayed silently for strength, for wisdom, for justice. When court reconvened, Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. Mr. Boone, I have one question for you. His eyes, sharp beneath bushy brows, fixed on Kevin's face. Why risk your life for a child not your own? The courtroom fell silent, waiting. Kevin stood, chains clinking softly. Because God gave her to me when I asked him for a reason to live. His voice was quiet but unwavering. I walked into that desert ready to die, sir. Instead, I found new life, found purpose, found love. He glanced at Whitford. Not in wealth or position, but in a baby's trust, in the chance to give her the love she deserves, no matter her blood or background. A hush fell over the gallery. Even the judge seemed moved, his stern expression softening slightly. But before he could speak, Whitford's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, we request a delay to bring additional witnesses. We have telegraphed for ranch hands who can verify James Whitford's connection to the child's mother. Judge Harrison considered, then nodded slowly. I'll grant 1 day's continuance. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock. As the bailiff led Kevin back to his cell, he caught Maria's eye. She nodded encouragingly, but he saw the worry in her face. Another night of waiting, another night separated from mercy. In his cell that evening, Kevin paced the narrow space. Each step brought memories of mercy, her weight in his arms, her tiny fingers gripping his, her peaceful breathing as she slept against his chest. He sank to his knees beside the cot, trembling but steadfast in his faith. Lord, he whispered, protect her tonight. Let her feel your love, even in that cold mansion, and give me strength to face whatever comes tomorrow. Outside his window, the sun set in streaks of gold and crimson. Somewhere in that same twilight, his daughter waited. Kevin touched the crucifix once more and continued his silent vigil, praying through the gathering darkness. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows as Whitford strode forward, a thin woman in a starched nurse's uniform at his side. Her testimony began smoothly, describing how she had attended the birth at Whitford's ranch house last spring. Kevin's heart sank as she spoke with practiced confidence about James Whitford's involvement. But Reverend Holloway leaned forward suddenly, whispering urgently to Kevin's lawyer. The defender rose, papers in hand. Ma'am, you claim the birth occurred in April at the Whitford estate? That is correct. Yet these midwife records show the mother, Annaba, was treated by Maria Sanchez 30 miles away that same week. The lawyer held up Maria's worn ledger. How do you explain this discrepancy? The nurse faltered, her composure cracking. Judge Harrison's expression darkened as more contradictions emerged under questioning. Whitford's face reddened. He surged to his feet, fists pounding the table. This is absurd. No half-breed child will ever inherit my name or property. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge's gavel cracked sharply. Kevin stood, chains rattling. Your Honor, this child deserves truth, not erasure. She deserves love, not shame." Judge Harrison studied them both, then spoke firmly. "The court finds sufficient evidence that Mr. Boone acted as a true father, saving and nurturing this child when others would have left her to die. The adoption is hereby granted. Release him." The gallery erupted in chaos, cheers mixing with angry mutters. As the bailiff unlocked Kevin's chains, a deputy entered carrying Mercy. The baby reached for Kevin with a cry of recognition. He swept her into his arms, tears flowing freely as she gripped his shirt. "I'll never let go, little one," he whispered, holding her close. "Never again." Whitford stormed out, but Kevin barely noticed. His whole world was the small, warm bundle against his chest, and the miracle of being her father at last. The weeks flowed gentle as a creek after spring floods. Kevin found his rhythm at the Sanchez Ranch, working from sunup to sundown, with Mercy snug against his back in a sling Maria had sewn. The baby cooed as he mended fences and guided sheep to fresh pasture, her tiny hands patting his shoulders while he worked. Evenings brought blessed peace. They gathered around Maria's worn oak table, sharing bowls of fragrant stew and fresh-baked bread. After supper, Kevin would cradle Mercy on the floor, watching her crawl toward Maria's son, who delighted in making her giggle. Maria's voice rose sweet and clear in old hymns, and Kevin found himself humming along, his heart full. One crisp autumn evening, as golden light painted the adobe walls, Kevin's hands trembled as he approached Maria on the porch. He offered no grand promises, just his devotion, his labor, and his love for her and her son. When she smiled and whispered yes, tears gleamed in both their eyes. The wedding day dawned clear and cool. The small adobe church filled with neighbors, faces that had once turned away in suspicion, now bright with joy. Reverend Holloway's words rang with conviction as he blessed their union, declaring them a family bound by love rather than blood. As twilight painted the sky in purple and gold, Kevin walked with his new wife and daughter toward home. Maria's son ran ahead, calling to the sheep. Kevin paused once, gazing back toward the distant dunes where he had once sought an end. The cry that had drawn him from that darkness now burbled happy against his chest as Mercy reached for her mother's hair. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, and turned toward home, where lamplight beckoned through Maria's windows, promising warmth, family, and a future bright with grace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.